Thank you very much, Felicia, and a happy Sunday to everyone from all over the world, as I can see in chat. In taking the subject of this panel, the power to change, I wanted to explore how we could break that discussion around change into a series of questions. And I think in making change, the first question to ask is why? Why do we need to change? After exploring that, I'd like to think about what we need to change. And I have some ideas I'd like to share. And then some reflections on how to change. What do we need to make that change happen? So let's begin with the question of why. And why brings us to the three planetary emergencies, which I see most commonly in my practice. The first, the climate emergency, perhaps the most keenly felt and the most visible. But the second is the health emergency. Cities all over the world are suffering from unhealthy people, physically and mentally. Physically, with obesity being the prominent disease, and mentally, with loneliness increasingly costing our lives and costing our budgets in terms of its impact. And design has a big impact on these. And then the third planetary emergency is shelter, the ability to deliver decent, dignified shelter to people wherever they are. And again, exemplified most obviously with the huge planetary migrations currently underway as the result of all wars, and most recently the war in Ukraine. So what do we need to change? And you no doubt have a long list of ideas about what we might change. The one I'd like to offer first is the idea of being in cities. What does it mean to be in a city? And I'd like to suggest that the human experience is profound, and the collective human experience of the city as a transaction machine is hugely important. We have cities because they are the greatest concentrations of people to come together to transact, both socially and economically. And if you break down the most everyday scene of people having fun in cities, the anthropologists tell us that there are particular activities, beginning with being present in space, co-present with other people, activities that are fundamental to that process of trade. We communicate. It might just be a wave. It might be a nod. We begin to interact with each other. Those interactions might lead to a transaction, a deal, a social deal. I'll meet you later. Let's meet again tomorrow. Or a financial deal. Let's do some business. We introduce our friends to other people and grow our networks of social contact through introduction. Those introductions can lead to innovations that cities are then the best place to broadcast the inventions that are created in them. Together, I like to call this the urban buzz. This is the essence of being in cities. And that being takes place most obviously in streets. And streets are key, I believe, to the addressing, if not the answering, of those planetary emergencies. Because for a long time, cities were built around streets, highly connected, dense networks of streets that facilitated interactions and generated innovations. Cities like Florence, all the historic cities of history, until architects and urban planners towards the beginning of the 20th century decided they knew better. Le Corbusier's plan for the Plan Voisin did away with those streets, replaced them with singular buildings and fast highways. And that formula has been followed around the planet by every urbanizing city, so-called urbanizing city. We've seen the centers of our cities eroded on the back of the Plan Voisin. And remember, voisin is not the French translation of neighbor. It's the Voisin automobile company that sponsored all of this. This indeed is Le Corbusier's own Voisin automobile. Our cities have become fragmented strips, isolated islands of urbanism, divided by fast highways and then painted by green landscapes to almost pretend that those problems are not there. But this is the reality of most planetary urbanism. So what do we need to do? We need to change the way we design streets. And for all the designers on this, if I could direct you and your talents to one area, it would be to the street. In my own practice, our designs are built around streets and then their cousins, the parks and the public spaces, that together form the tissue in which those human transactions can most profoundly take place. Design continuously connected streetscapes. There is more social justice to be designed in 1 mile, 1 kilometer of street than there is in a 1 mile tall, 1 kilometer tall skyscraper. Focus your design intent at the ground level. In doing so, slow the city down. 20 miles an hour, 30 kilometers an hour is the speed at which vehicles should limit their movement in cities. And this is where we are focusing our practice at the city scale. Design landscape urbanism of continuously connected networks, not landscape urbanism of fragmented pseudo-city separated by green, divisive corridors. Finally, I'd like to embrace the question of how do we change? Well, the first part of this I would like to suggest is evidence. It's science. Move into the realms of digital urbanism. Embrace technologies that allow us to understand the seemingly complex web of connections across cities and give it a hierarchy to help you then understand how the more connected, more walkable places have less obesity associated with them. Bring the medical science together with the urban science. Understand where people are more lonely, where they're more car dependent, and use these findings to campaign for better design and better budgets to address those disconnections. Use pedestrian modeling to test the new scheme in white. Will it work? It's going to be cold blue, low flow, disconnected. Go back to the drawing board. Redesign. Take the streets pointing at the site, bring them together, generate your design around those. Continuously connected places generate heat in terms of pedestrian flows. This is the approach we took 25 years ago in redesigning Trafalgar Square in central London, using studies of human behavior. Focus on the person, not on the building. Focus on the space between the building, not the building. Build models that help you understand the connections between connected cities and land value so that you can speak to investors and give them greater certainty that their investment can support not just an idea for a bridge, but an idea for a living bridge like this in Melbourne, a bridge lined with buildings, carrying a tram, carrying cycle paths, much more than people thought was possible when you can demonstrate the urban impact. And the final part of how do you make think, or the penultimate part of how you change is through persistence. I'd like to pay tribute to my neighbor, my friend, Amanda, whose work campaigning over 6 years finally persuaded the powers to be to reduce the speed limit in the town center of the town where we live to 20 miles an hour by demonstrating the evidence, never saying that they were going to give up, always continuing to work hard. And lastly, community. Connect your designs, your ideas, your friendships. Use the power of the network, the community, to demonstrate and create the science, to demonstrate and create the effort to persuade the politicians to change. Set change within the planetary emergencies of climate, health, and shelter. Design streets, design parks, design public spaces. Use evidence, be persistent, and build your practice within a larger community. Thank you very much.
Incredible. Thanks so much, Tim. I really love what your perspective on designing that 1 kilometer on the street level and thinking about all the interactions that happen at that level. Um, and also the idea of being persistent and building community, I think is very powerful. So really appreciate your insight on that.